find me the one. So.
I can yell. Matthew, what's the impact of carbon pricing on your agenda? How does that fit?
Look, unfortunately, the carbon price package, the Clean Energy Future plan, is effectively making gas more competitive. So it would actually be a sort of like, for me, it's like scoring your own goal. It's bad news. The worst thing you can do is build new capital infrastructure. I'd prefer to have transition coal. That means run a coal plant for a few more years than build a brand new gas plant. Okay? So if we're not going to call for, my preference number one is transition renewables. It's exactly the same as regular renewables, but you just start building them now. My second preference is transition coal. That's where the coal plants run just a little bit longer, and then you get transition renewables, and then you're on renewables. The last thing we want is any new capital plant, because you don't want to go and get $1 billion of money in the economy, which generally somehow comes from us or a proportion of us. Right? That's the way economies work, whether it comes through our private spend or our taxation, and ends up in this giant facility that we shouldn't have built. A belching dirty coal plant, if it belches dirtily for another couple of years, well, that's going to be nothing like 50 years of a gas plant operating. And not only that, gas has been grossly underplayed at its carbon intensity, like significantly higher. We actually commissioned Wally Parsons to do a report. It's been in the media a lot, and they refused to hand it over to me. I've got a signed contract and everything, I can show it on my computer, to give us a report on the total life cycle of coal seam gas and gas in Australia. And I've got a good idea as to what the findings are, because we had meetings with them while they were writing the report, and in the end the legal department in Queensland, Brisbane, wouldn't let us have that report. It then went to the board, or they red flagged it and went to the board won't hand it over, so they refused to give us our report. And the saga's been going on for a while now, and they've been saying things that, like, I'm promulgating, I don't know, so when they say perpetrating a falsehood against Wally Parsons and all this sort of stuff, but I can just show the contract, and I'm in the right here. They owe me a report. I've got a scope of work and everything, and I know it's in the report because the people who actually did the work in Wally Parsons, the engineers who know the oil and gas industry, you know, they were telling me along the way where the vectors of emissions are, where the losses are in well workovers, well completion, blowouts. You know, there's this ridiculous comments like from Santos chief claiming their business is gas, so they wouldn't lose one molecule, and everyone knows that the kind of pumps they use aren't sealless pumps. They've got seals, and therefore they all leak, whether they leak a minute amount or a lot. And that during well completion, they have a whole lot of water coming out at the same time as gas, and they can't even flare that at that stage. So they claim that where they do have gas, they're flaring, but they can't flare during the well completion stage because there's a whole lot of water coming out at the same time and they can't get the flame going. And it also was talking about issues with connectivity between wet and dry aquifers. In both cases, the gas actually migrates through the strata and can migrate to get migratory emissions through other connections, and other connections can include heaps of existing agricultural wells and bores that are all over the place, and many of them aren't mapped. So yes, there's a lot of parts. I mean, it's quite likely in the case where they drill a well for CSG and they don't get the pressure they were looking for, because that's the first thing they do. They let it go and they find out if it's got pressure and they try and estimate it's going to last for 7 years or something. Where they don't get the pressure they were going to achieve, it's possible in some of those cases what's actually happened is that when they pumped the water, the gas then got a new exit via what they've opened up from pumping the water, because the water keeps the gas capped down. It's the water that keeps the gas underneath, and that's why they're pumping gigalitres of water out there, which, mind you, and aside from emissions, the local emissions on the water is shocking. They have cadmium in it, you know, all sorts of heavy metals. It's salty, so it's various levels of toxicity. And sometimes they're talking about putting it through reverse osmosis, and I don't believe they're doing it as a rule because RO is pretty expensive. But if they do RO, you've got the odd case where they say, oh, put it through RO, and some farmers using it to water his crop. And personally, I don't want to be eating that food, because some of the elemental stuff that's in the H2O is smaller molecules than H2O, so therefore running it through RO won't actually get those traces out of the water. Secondly, they don't talk about where the solid brine goes. So when you do RO, you end up with this sort of sludge at the end, and that's got to go into a landfill or some location somewhere, lined or unlined, and that's like a big toxic mound, you know, because it could have been stuff that was suspended deep underground in an aquifer, gigalitres of it, and it's in suspension there. So, you know, could then possibly drink a small amount of that and not get sick, but once you concentrate that down, but you obviously don't want that constantly irrigated onto farms or anything like that. So, yeah, pretty nasty stuff, and I wouldn't be putting it on my farm. I think we'll be hitting farmers up with the information that the membranes are letting H2O molecules through, and there's things that are smaller in molecule size than H2O, and that's coming with it. So it's only holding back the stuff that's bigger than H2O molecules. That's the problem with starting with a contaminated supply.
Oh, Matthew, I've always wondered how you can create energy from solar during the night. You know, I know you sort of glossed over there, but could you explain these hot and cold storage tanks, how you can actually use it for at night time?
You can use chemical electrical batteries to do it. It's just more expensive. It's about 10 times the price, although that could reduce to 5 times the price, because Nissan are claiming that within 3 years they're going to be able to double the size of their battery for the same price in their Nissan Leafs. So the chemical electrical batteries that you have at your house will only be 5 times the price of doing it this way. Okay. So there's potentially a convergence there, but at this stage we thought that batteries distributed throughout the grid, chemical batteries, aren't going to do it, and the thermal heat storage is going to be the cost competitive option. And we might be wrong, and if in 2 years' time we're doing another version of our plan and chemical electric batteries are only twice the price of this, we might say, oh, well, we probably wouldn't invest some money in this, we'll just go straight to batteries or whatever. I doubt that's the case though. We've looked at the future projections. So basically what you've got is salt, and this is from Haifa, multi-K, so that's multi-K, potassium, 2 bags, and sodium, and sodium nitrate, potassium nitrate, and they're in mixture, so in other words they're blended, so they're put in deliberately for every 6 parts of sodium nitrate they put in the tank, they're putting in 4 parts of potassium nitrate. And they do that via sort of a hopper thing, and there's a plant commissioning, they actually bring in an LPG tanker, and they melt the salt as it goes into the hopper, and that takes about 4 to 6 weeks. And that's it. From then on, they're storing it just in these 2 tanks. They're insulated with about 1/2 metre of mineral wool, and the salt's in a molten state. It lasts for 2 months if the plant failed in the cold tank, because it's stored at 290 degrees Celsius, but it freezes at like 217 or 220 or something like that.
Sorry, Matthew, just if you could slow down just a fraction.
Sorry.
You're saying that the sodium nitrate and the potassium nitrate mix stores charge?
Stores heat.
Okay.
So it's like a thermos flask. So you can either bring a petrol generator with you to the picnic, and you could fuel that and boil your kettle, and you have a hot tea at the picnic, or you can bring your thermos flask and use the storage from home. Okay. This is the thermos flask approach.
I understand. And do those chemicals break down at all?
No, so they're in basic and they're stable. They break down if they go greater than 600 degrees Celsius. So that's why the plant stops at 565. But there is work on different mixtures to be able to run these plants higher. So the absolute premium coal plant is sort of running at 650 degrees, a little bit higher temperature than this. That just gets you a couple more % efficiency. But at 565, with the exception of Kogan Creek, you're sort of at the equivalent of the coal plants across this country, 565 degrees Celsius. Okay, so we start in the so that's the salt's all filled up in this tank. So this is the cold tank. It's carbon steel, and it's full to the brim. You know, it might be a foot below the top of that the roof. Where am I? Confused.
Is corrosion affected with something like sodium nitrate?
And it's going to get really confusing. Okay. Alright, so corrosion. So it's actually not that corrosive. The hot side of the plant and the upcomer is all stainless steel, so it becomes a tiny bit corrosive as it gets hotter. These tanks, this is an EPC contract, so the company that supplied the tank guarantees the tank. Each of the components are guaranteed. That's how they've built all these plants. It's standard in a big industrial plant. And so they've basically warranted those for 30 years. So 31 years it could rust out. They don't have a liability on their hands, but the science behind that is that the carbon tanks can handle that for good, and that it's stainless, which is a lot more expensive on the hot side. Okay, so we just commissioned the plant, so we've had our LPG tank and we've filled that up with molten salt, and we're pretty good at making these plants. We're on plant number 5, so we can just go straight ahead and make it work. Okay, so we haven't got any risk or anything. We're not going to do it. Okay, so what happens is in the morning, just when the sun comes over the horizon, the panels track up and down, which is called elevation, and they track east and west, which is called azimuth. So they'll track X and Y, okay? And they all track individually slightly different angle, because the sun angle to get up to there from each of them, they're spatially a different spot, is a slightly different angle. So they're all tracking, the computer controls that, pretty accurate. They've even got a test thing where they're going to test them on a little square, one at a time, all through the day. Let's test one of them and put it back, okay? Like a target, it's target practice just below the top of the tower. I'll show you a photo of the target. So what happens is, at the beginning of the day, the sun just comes up, and the first thing they do is there's not much heat hitting the top of the tower, so instead of actually bringing the cold salt up to the hot tank, the first thing they do is they run the cold salt up to the top of the tower, heat it up, and they dump it back in the cold tank. So the cold tank is no longer 290 degrees, it starts to go 292, 293, 294, 295. Then the sun comes more up on the horizon to the point where they're actually getting enough heat energy off the sun, which might be around 8 or 9 AM or something. And at that point, they switch the pump valves, and the salt goes from the cold tank and then goes down into the hot tank at 565 degrees. To get it hitting the tank at 565 degrees constantly, they want to keep it pretty on target at 565 degrees. They can handle a bit of variance. It could come in there, the tank could be sitting at 560 if they wanted. Although if it is sitting at 560, they'll actually dump 570 degrees salt in, and they'll try and lift the temperature of the salt in the tank. So they do that by varying the pump speeds. So they're variable speed pumps, and so they just pump. If they pump faster, then they can avoid. Sorry, if there's more solar flux, they'll pump faster. If there's less solar flux, they'll pump slower. So they always maintain 565 degrees. Okay. So during the day, they actually don't need to run the generator. There's 2 sides to the plant. One is the generation side, and one is the solar collection side. So the solar collection side is just moving the salt from the cold tank to the hot tank. And the aim of the people who are doing that side of the business is to keep that hot salt tank as full as much as possible. So whenever there's solar flux, they get salt from the cold to the hot tank. Now, at the same time that they're moving salt from the cold to the hot tank, they can be running some of the salt through a heat exchanger and back in. And the heat exchanger's got water running through it, and that water then turns into steam and then runs through the turbine. Now, if there's an excess of power out there, it's a really quiet day, they can actually just bank all the heat in the hot tank. They actually don't need to generate. They can spend 3 hours without generating. And so if you think of the ratio like this, is the simplest way to think of it. If they're generating, they're using one lot of salt that's going up here, so 1 part out of 3 is going to generation, and the other 2 parts are going to storage for night time or for late afternoon. So the thermal side of the power plant, it's currently collecting, in the middle of the day, it's collecting 3 times the amount of energy that it needs to generate in real time in the day. And 2 out of 3 of those parts are being put away for night, and then that generates at night. Now finally, if you want, if you've got greater penetrations of these in the grid, and you're not confident of your geographical diversity or whatever, then you can add gas, which I disagree with doing, fossil gas co-firing, or you can add biomass co-firing, and that can be in the form of biogas or biomass pellets, or similar, some biomass source. And then it's actually a lot more efficient to heat